You're right on time. The fire's just starting to get cozy. Bundle up and find a seat, and let's begin today's cozy horror with me, Dr. Blake. Let's get some great stories going while you relax a little and enjoy your day, at least for the time being. All of us narrators on YouTube have dabbled in creating our own terrifying creations. I'm certainly no exception there. So, let's hear about a character that's taken on a life of his own as we learn a little bit more about Tommy Terrifier. My husband Thomas is a writer of short horror, and I'm very proud of him. He crafts these unique little tales about horrific situations, and people really like them. I won't name drop here, but you may have read some of his work if you've been in the community for a while. He writes a lot, and his stories have been read by a lot of different narrators. Recently, though, things have changed. He's been thinking of narrating his own stories for years, but he just never thought he was up to the task. His voice won't play well with the audience, he says. No one will want to hear someone read their own stories, he says. His stories aren't very good, even though he makes money writing them. He has thousands of excuses, but finally I told him to just try it and keep his expectations realistic. He gave it a try, and from the first video, things have been great for him, but very strange for me. You see, when my husband records videos, he becomes someone else. It all started with Dr. Winston and the Hospital of Horrors, a series my husband writes. Dr. Winston is a stuttery little guy, someone who's afraid of his own shadow, and when my husband does his voice, it doesn't even sound like him anymore. I've never actually seen him do the voice. Not really. We have a 2-bedroom apartment, so he sets up his studio in the bedroom since our son has the other room. He bought one of those green screen curtains from Amazon and some wall foam to cut down on the reverb, and he pulls the curtain and sits behind the screen as he works. Sometimes I'll sit in bed and listen, hearing the story unfold, and the first time I heard that whispery little voice come from behind the curtain, I had to get up and peek and make sure it was just him back there. His voices are spectacular, and soon he had a dozen or more of them. Lenny Drover, Dr. Winston, Ozark Uncle, Raymond W. Sanders, Dr. Summer, just to name a few, but it's the Terrifier that I hate to hear. Tommy Terrifier is a reoccurring villain in his story. Tommy is a creature that hunts children after dark, and sometimes leaves them skinned alive beneath trees or on benches or somewhere else where people will find them. He's the antagonist of Corbin Banner, an Atlanta detective, and has become a fan favorite. The people just love the voice he does, the deep, resonating voice that speaks of horrible acts and terrible deeds. I sometimes put my headphones on when he reads stories about Skinner Park, but I find that the voice of Tommy the Terrifier still bleeds through my AirPods. Don't worry, little one. I'll make it quick. You won't feel a thing. I'll snatch your skin so fast. You won't have time to... Stop! Stop! Please, no! I shouted one evening, and my Thomas threw the curtain back and looked at me in alarm. What's wrong? Are you okay? He asked, the chair falling over as he stood up. Yeah, sorry. I must have dozed off and had a nightmare. He snorted and gave me a cuddle, going back to work as I turned up the volume and tried to ignore the horrible voice he used. We went to bed not long after. The audio finished for the evening, but when I woke up sometime later, I saw a light out of the corner of my eye. There was a ghostly glow from behind the curtain, and the edges billowed slightly in the breeze from the AC. He'd left his setup on, the curtain usually covering his workspace, and the chair was lit in the backdrop of the computer screen. I could swear there was something more behind that curtain, but I didn't have my glasses on, and I couldn't see it clearly. As I watched, the chair seemed to glide as it swiveled around. The curtain rustled ever so slightly at the bottom, and behind that gauzy barrier, I could see someone hunched in the chair. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. They saw me seeing them, and when he smiled, it was like bugs on my skin. "Hello, Poppet. Fancy a stroll by the old canal?" I felt my breath hitch, my throat cramping as the terror spread through me. It was him. It was Tommy Terrifier. It was him, and he was just beyond the curtain. When he stood up suddenly, his height imposing despite his obvious age, my throat opened and the scream I loosed sounded like a tornado siren. My husband came awake violently, reaching for the bat he kept by the bedside. He believed that there was an intruder, that something had woken me up and scared the hell out of me. He was out of bed and looking for the source of my fear, and when I pointed to the curtain, he looked confused. He pushed the curtain aside with the bat and revealed nothing but the chair and the glowing screen of the monitor. I tried to explain to him what I had seen, but he just kissed my forehead and told me I must have been dreaming. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I found myself watching that curtain, waiting for the creature to return, praying it wouldn't get me if it did. As the sun came up, I finally slipped off, waking up a little later when the smell of lunch being cooked hit my nose. The bed was empty except for me, and Thomas had packed his green screen up after last night's scare. I could hear him in the kitchen whistling as he cooked something on the stove, and I crawled out of bed as I reached for my robe. It was Sunday, and our son was likely at someone's house, which would leave the two of us the day to ourselves. I would have plenty of chances to rest, the night before already a hazy memory, and as I crept up the hall, I tried to cover my mouth as I got ready to startle him. My husband, for writing such scary stuff, is kind of a fraidy cat. He puts on a spooky deep voice for his videos, but he's a big old scaredy cat in reality. My favorite thing to do is startle him, something I probably do too often, but as I came into the kitchen, he must have heard me. He never looked up from what he was cooking, but I heard a terrifyingly familiar voice just before I reached out to grab him. "Careful now, Puppet. You wouldn't want to startle me at my work." I don't know if I slipped when my foot came down, but when I hit the floor, I was already backpedaling. I was scooting away, my fear returning, and when he turned to look at me, I could swear his face had changed. Gone was the beard and glasses I'd grown accustomed to, the thin lips and the green eyes I loved. His face was pale and clean-shaven, his skin pockmarked and cratered. His teeth grinned shark-like from his mouth, thin and needle-like, and I screamed and covered my face as he took a step towards me. I flinched and struck out with my fists as he touched me, and when I saw that Thomas was looking down at me with concern, I felt confused. When I saw the trickle of blood coming from his nose, the confusion turned to shame. "Jesus, I'm so sorry. I didn't think you'd react that badly. I didn't mean to scare you. I heard you creeping up on me and thought I'd startle you a little for a change." He apologized as he helped me up, but that was only the beginning. I didn't sit in the bedroom while he recorded anymore, but that wasn't the last time I heard the voice of Tommy Terrifier. I heard it wafting from under the door, inserting itself in my ears as I tried to block it out on the couch in the living room. More terrifying still, I heard it in my husband's voice as he went about his day-to-day life. It was little things at first. Tommy Terrifier had a noticeable British accent, and I began to notice the way my husband pronounced certain words. He never noticed, but there was an inflection on certain words sometimes that made my skin crawl. When I mentioned it to him, he just looked at me strangely and said it must be something he wasn't aware of. Our son, Nathaniel, didn't seem to be able to hear it either, though. When I mentioned it to him, often right after it happened, he would shrug and say that he couldn't hear it. No one but me seemed to be able to hear the odd inflection he put on, and I began to feel like they were both messing with me. The other thing was that he started calling me Poppet. First I thought it was something he was doing on purpose, but when he kept looking at me strangely anytime I brought it up, I began to doubt. It was like he didn't realize he was saying it, and my upset confused him. We were having problems at this point, fighting over my perceived treatment, and his lack of understanding honestly made it worse. The straw that broke the camel's back, though, was the sleep talking. Thomas had never talked in his sleep. He barely even snored, but suddenly he was talking in his sleep almost every night. Well, it wasn't really him talking. It was Tommy Terrifier who was talking to someone as Thomas lay sleeping beside me. He always just called them Poppet, the name Tommy gave the kids in the stories before he killed them, but it was also the name he'd been calling me for weeks now. As I lay there listening to him talk about all the grisly things he meant to do, I realized that he might be talking to me instead of some random kid he was dreaming about. Sometimes he would turn his head and look in my direction, and I could feel his eyes behind his lids looking at me. I wanted to wake him up, but by now I realized it wouldn't do any good. He would just think I was having mental problems or something, and the fights would continue. I moved to the couch that night, and when he found me there in the morning, I told him I was having bad dreams and I didn't want to wake him up. Not long after that, he told me about a new angle for the show. The fans have really been liking the series, especially Tommy Terrifier, thinking about changing the show up so Tommy reads the stories sometimes. I might get more audience interaction, kind of shake up my listeners a little bit. I tried to be supportive of this, but I was not pleased to hear that Tommy would be making more appearances in his makeshift booth. After that, every third or fourth story was narrated by Tommy Terrifier. Then it was every other. As the voice became a regular part of his show, the night talking got worse. He would say the most depraved things I could barely believe my normally sweet husband would say. He would talk for hours about skinning people alive or pulling out their teeth, and I would lie there in terror as it all just played out around me. I'd taken to using sleep meds so I could get to sleep before him, but sometimes that voice would follow me into my dreams, and I would spend my nights in a state of constant terror. Sometimes I couldn't get to sleep before him, but even from the couch, his dark words seemed to find me. I came to realize that this wasn't something he could help, and I stopped bringing it up. He was so excited about his channel that I hated to put a damper on his enthusiasm by telling him how it affected me. Engagement was way up, he would say. He had more subscribers than ever, he would say. People were commenting how much they loved Tommy Terrifier, he would say. Ad revenue was at an all-time high, and maybe he could cut back at work and take more time for the channel, he would say. On and on and on about how people liked that terrifying voice of his, and I would nod and agree and tell him how great it all was. Meanwhile, I was a nervous wreck in my own home, waiting for the next encounter with Tommy. Before long, the show became Tommy Terrifier's Terrifying Tales, and Tommy began to make an appearance in every episode. That's when I began to notice the physical change in Thomas. He was spending more and more time in our bedroom, the door closed and that terrible voice creeping from beneath it. It wasn't just me hearing it now. Nathan had begun avoiding the back of the house, spending more time in the living room than usual when he was at home. I asked him why, but he wouldn't tell me. He said he hadn't been sleeping well lately, and I can relate. He's been sleeping on the couch with me sometimes, and we both shudder when the voice of Tommy Terrifier slips down the hall. That was a week ago. Now the only time he leaves the house is for evening runs. He says it's when he gets his best writing done, but I've come to doubt his words. He always comes back sweaty and disheveled, and his stories have taken a very dark cast. They've become less horror and more horrific. The mutilations and violence have reached a new level, and all of it is delivered by the voice of Tommy Terrifier. He doesn't even sound like himself when the mic is off now. His normal voice has begun to appear less and less, and I'm afraid that one day that pale creature will come out of the bedroom instead. It's getting late now, and though he hasn't come back, the police have come asking questions. They questioned everyone in the neighborhood at the start of the violence, but they had some very probing questions about my husband tonight. Where does he run? When does he run? Had I noticed any strange behavior? Did I notice a change in his personality? Apparently, some of the stories he's been writing lately have been a little too similar to the murders in the park, and the police want to bring him in as a person of interest. I told them he was out running and they could find him in the park. After they left, I put the chain on and waited for him to come back. He hasn't returned, but I woke up to hear a familiar voice coming from the bedroom. It seems there's a new story to be told tonight, and the sounds of Tommy Terrifier sound almost gleeful. I don't know what to do. I'm not even sure how he got back inside. I want to leave, but I'm frozen in fear as I sit on the couch with my son. I don't know if I'm more afraid that the voice will continue or that it will stop. Because if it stops, I'm not sure if I might not become just another one of those tales he reads for his audience every night. Let's move on to the only thing more terrifying than the voices that sometimes come out of my mouth. That's right, the grabbing, clawing sensation of cold toes in the middle of the night. From Tommy Terrifier, we go straight in to Tommy Cold Toes. There's a legend in my town that has always stuck with me, and it's something we grow up hearing since we're very small. Tommy Cold Toes is as much a part of our lives as things like Soap Sally and the Wampus Cat. It's a story that our parents used to scare us into behaving. It's always the same thing, said in those tones of knowledge that make you believe it's true. Better get to bed on time, or Tommy Cold Toes might decide to crawl into your bed. You better not get up to mischief, or Tommy Cold Toes will find his way into your bed. Don't you dare lie to your mother, or Tommy Cold Toes will let her know. The story it comes from is even more chilling than the thought of a ghost in your bed. It's a story about how even a town with less than 1,000 people can host a murderer. Our town was founded in 1789 by a handful of settlers. By 1819, they had either befriended or conquered the Indians that lived in the area, and their daily struggles were mostly personal. The town had around 300 residents, give or take, and one winter they had a problem with a lake in the area. Mather's Lake was a common place to find picnickers or fishermen, but this winter it became the dumping ground for a serial killer. The accounts say that the sheriff was called to the lake one morning at first light to assess a body. A fisherman by the name of Jeremy Gooding had come before dawn to cut a hole for some ice fishing. As the sun rose, however, he felt like someone was watching him. When he looked down to find a body looking up at him through the ice, he said he nearly had a heart attack. The man had gone in his wagon and driven back to town to get the sheriff, and the sheriff had brought a few men with him with saws to break through the ice. With the help of the fishermen, they had pulled out the body of Gilbert Campbell. Gilbert was a farmer from the area and a notorious sot. He wasn't a very good farmer, and it was well known that he had too many mouths to feed and not enough money to afford his drinking and his children. The general consensus was that he'd been walking across the ice on his way home from town and had fallen through and drowned. He couldn't swim, this was widely known, and he was likely too drunk to properly flounder to the surface. His wife and children mourned him, but it was all chalked up to an accident, and life went on. When Gooding went to the same lake 2 weeks later and found 2 more bodies floating beneath the crust of ice, it was harder to push it off as an accident. The victims, Delbert Moore and Winston Fergan, were from the town, though Delbert was a day laborer and Winston was a blacksmith's apprentice. While Gilbert's route home would have taken him across the lake, there was no reason why either of these men should have been in the area. Delbert worked for a farm on the other side of town, and Winston lived above the blacksmith. The sheriff refused to entertain the idea that these could be anything but accidents, but when the 4th body came out of the lake, he had to admit that they might have a problem. The 4th was Harvey McMillan, the son of Drake McMillan, who owned the local bank, and Drake was mad to catch the man who had killed his son. As Mr. McMillan leaned on the sheriff to get results, the sheriff began to apply more pressure to people of interest. There were patrols set up around the lake, and the other local fishing holes were checked for signs of bodies. That was when they discovered 4 more bodies, all farmhands or laborers, and a pattern began to become apparent. All of them were immigrants, except for Harvey. Harvey was born in town, but he'd taken his accent from his father, and the sheriff supposed that's why he had been targeted. It appeared they had a problem on their hands, and it was a problem that the sheriff was very interested in solving. The local sheriff was supposed to keep the peace, and if he couldn't protect the people from whoever was dropping them into the frozen lakes, then they would find someone who could. The town had instituted a watch, keeping citizens on the street to a minimum after dark. They had to assume that these deaths were the result of people being coerced away after dark, and if they could limit the killer's potential victims, then they could catch him in the act. They suspected Jeremy Gooding for a time, but the boy's alibi was strong. There was a rumor going around that a strange woman might be responsible, luring men away from the tavern so she could hide her crimes beneath the ice. They picked up a few women who frequented the local watering holes, but they were released in short order. For a time, the town lived in fear of who would be the next body pulled out of the icy lake. Then, just as December began, they found the body of Thomas Graves. Thomas, Tommy to his friends, was new in town, but well known by those who frequented the tavern. He was a laborer, but his exploits were known to lie at the bottom of a tankard. Tommy could drink any man in town under the table, and his thirst was as prodigious as he was. What's more, he wasn't prone to anger or the hooligan behaviors of his peers. He was a sociable drunk, a cheery sot, and everyone knew that he could drink a keg and still be awake to do the milking at first light. So when the sheriff was called to Carter's Pond at dusk to collect him, it was considered a shame by all. He had sent a pair of constables out to collect him in a wagon, and as they pulled him from the lake, they say his skin was as blue as the ice atop it. They checked his pulse and found him stone cold dead, so they loaded him into a wagon and took him into town. This was December, so the snow was deep and the road was pitted. They had a sheet over him as he lay in his funeral wagon, and the men shivered as they rode with only the moon to keep them company. Both were in some hurry to be done with this task, so they could get to the tavern themselves before heading home to their wives. The grim task would be easier to sleep on after a drink was inside them, and neither were paying as much attention to the body in the back as they should have. The body bounced like a stone as they rode, and neither of them could have said when that bouncing stopped. When they arrived in the town and pulled the sheet away, they found the back of the wagon empty. They had lost the body somewhere along the way, and when they told the sheriff, he was livid. He told them the town already believed that they were making a botch of this, and made them go back the way they had come to look for it. It should be easy to find, he told them. It's a frozen body lying by the side of the road. The two men set out to backtrack their route, but no matter how much they looked or how far they went, they couldn't find the frozen body. They found no sign either. There was no indent in the snow, no sign of scavengers taking something away, and they were left to wonder where it had gone. They searched till morning, spending a night in the cold as they looked for their missing victim. They were still searching when the sun came up, and when they heard hoofbeats approaching, they were hoping it was others who would help them look. Instead, the sheriff came riding up with another man in tow to collect them. The body had been found, and it was in the last place they would have expected. Judge Henry Margus, a judge for the county seat, had awoken to find the body of Thomas Graves in his bed. His servants had heard him screaming and come to check on him, finding him in the corner as he shook and pointed at the bed that he had evacuated. They said that he had been gibbering about rolling over and feeling the cold feet of the dead man against his leg, and wouldn't say much else. He had been shaking as his butler took him off to the sitting room. That same butler, the man who had come out with the sheriff, had secured the bedroom so that they might have a look and come to fetch him immediately. He and his men took statements from the staff and the very shaken judge, but it was ultimately nothing but a strange bit of gossip for the women around the well that day. They took the body to the station so the family could come collect it, and that was when it disappeared a second time. The sheriff, who had reprimanded the two deputies soundly for losing the body in the first place, was perplexed how Thomas Graves had disappeared a second time. He was less perplexed when the judge's footman arrived in the morning to say that Thomas Graves had appeared in his master's bed again. The sheriff arrived to find the man shaken, unable to even speak, but he stuttered about the cold toes of the dead man that had pressed against him as he slept. They took the body away and decided it might be time to bury Tommy Graves so he would stop haunting the judge's house. He would have no idea how fitting a statement that would turn out to be. They buried Thomas Graves in a pauper's grave in the churchyard and thought that they had seen the end of him. They had considered leaving him in the crypt in case his family decided to come for him, but the sheriff was becoming tired of whoever was using Thomas to bedevil the judge. The man hadn't been to court in days, and it was said that the incident had rattled him. The sheriff watched as the undertaker and his apprentice buried Thomas Graves 8 feet in the ground, and hoped that this would be the end of the trouble. It hadn't gone unnoticed that there hadn't been another body found since they had pulled him from the ice, and some of the townspeople were whispering that Graves might have been the killer. Now his body was haunting the judge after death, and somehow that seemed to make it more believable that he was the one putting people in the ice. They had begged the sheriff to put a cage over top his grave, maybe even burn the body, but the sheriff was steadfast in his conviction that Tommy be buried. No servant came on the third day. On the third cold morning after Thomas had come out of the ice, the judge came bursting into the station to confess to murder. He confessed to the murders of all those pulled from the ice, including Tommy Graves. The sheriff's hunch had been right, it seemed, and he confessed to killing all of them because they were immigrants. He had never liked foreigners and assumed that no one would notice if a few of them went missing. He had assumed that someone would catch him after killing Harvey McMillan, but when he had walked away scot-free, he felt invincible. That was before, though. Now he was being hounded by the vengeful Thomas Graves and wanted the sheriff to protect him. I would have never killed him if I had known he would haunt me so." The sheriff knew they would find Tommy in the man's bed again, and that's just where he was when they went to collect him. It seemed, however, that Tommy wasn't content to stay put. They never found him in the judge's house again, but there were plenty of people who claimed to have seen him after that. Usually it was a shadowy figure walking along the road to town, the same route the wagon had taken when he had disappeared. Others say they've seen him near the lake, where he died, walking along the shore and watching the water. Others, however, claim that those with secrets, those with guilt, feel the press of cold toes against their leg in the night and know it's time to confess. I've never felt them, but I know people who claim they have, and that's as good as a confession around here. Whatever the reason, Tommy Cold Toes has become a story told from Halloween till Christmas in these parts. So if you roll over in the middle of the night and feel the cold press of toes against your leg, don't worry. It's just Tommy Cold Toes trying to get warm. Let me just poke up these coals a little bit before we start our next story. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. I can get my toes right up next to it now, so I don't suffer the same fate as old Tommy there. From cold toes to toll roads. Let's get right into this next story about, what else? The frustration of being stopped on a good drive. So, let's move right on in to Toll Road. I sighed as I saw the toll booth looming up in front of us. My wife and I had driven down this road 1,000 times in the 10 years we'd been married. It was actually the place we took our first date, and we loved to drive down it on Sundays and feel nostalgic. Despite the number of times we've driven the long and winding route, the toll booth always surprises me a little. It sounds weird to say that our first date was a drive, but I think it was honestly pretty sweet. I'm a photographer, have been since I was 19, and I often shoot weddings and family photos for people in the area. I've got an amazing eye for location, and my photos have been featured in not just people's homes, but also in magazines that debut the beauty of North Georgia and the Carolinas. The Appalachians have been my home since I was born, and I know how to bring out her beauty in my photos. I was 22 and on my way to a wedding when I spotted a car on the side of the road with a young woman sitting on the hood. She waved her hands at me, asking if I would stop, and I rolled down my window to see if I could help. She said her car had broken down and was wondering if I could help her out. I'm no mechanic, and my car knowledge stops at changing my oil, so I offered her a ride to the wedding I was attending so she could call a wrecker. She agreed and ended up hanging out with me the whole wedding. The wrecker couldn't get there for 3 or 4 hours, and I was the only person that she knew. So, in between photo shoots, we talked. I got her some food. Weddings usually have a little extra, and this one was more of a country union than a black tie affair. We sat around and chatted as I took some candid shots. We discovered that we actually had a lot in common, and when the wrecker called her, she told him to just drop it off at her mechanic. I drove her home afterwards and invited her to dinner with me later that week. I know what you'll say, it wasn't a real date, but it meant something to us, and we've considered it our first date for years. We even went back on our first anniversary to put a marker where her car had broken down. It may be a little macabre, but we put a wreath there to commemorate her little coupe. It had died on that spot the day we met. We still keep that wreath up. We stop at it sometimes so we can remember how we came to know each other. The spot where her car died is about 2 miles from the toll booth. The toll booth is an oddity. It's just a random toll booth out in the middle of the woods. You put 50 cents in the basket, the booth is never manned, and you head on your way. I have no idea who comes to collect the money. I don't imagine it makes a lot of it, but it's probably some senator's nest egg for when he gets put out of office. We always keep change in the car for just such an occasion, not minding paying a little toll to see the road that started our happy life. Today, however, I couldn't find 50 cents in the cup holder. It's been a busy week. We just put a down payment on our new house, my wife just started a new job, and I had just finished shooting a big wedding that more than paid for the down payment on the new house. But it left us a little light otherwise. We had cashed in our change jar that sat in the cup holder, something to get us by till payday, and I had forgotten to put more change in it afterwards for the toll road. The drive was kind of our date night this weekend. We had a picnic in the back seat, and we were going to go up to the lake where the wedding had been held. The lake was where we had had our own wedding, and we went there often to picnic or swim or just enjoy a quiet afternoon together. "What's the matter?" Carol asked. I dug a nickel out from between the seats and weighed the pathetic little pile of change. 5 pennies, 2 dimes, and a nickel were all I had managed to find under the seats. The arm hung stoically across the road, little more than a wooden suggestion than a real barrier. I had thought many times that I could probably just drive through it and be done with the stupid thing, but such things were a little too rebellious for me. "You got any change?" I asked, doubting she did, but wanting to be sure. "No," she said, looking through her purse before exclaiming, "Aha!" and dropping another nickel onto my palm. "Well, it's a little better, but it's not quite 50 cents. Just dig some out of the change cup," she said. I shook the cup at her, reminding that we had recently traded it in. "Oh, yeah. Well, what shall we do, my dear?" I considered turning around, maybe just forgetting the whole thing, but a new idea suddenly bubbled to the surface. I pulled onto the soft shoulder of the road, the car protesting as much as my wife. I'm sure my car's wheels were going to bog down any minute. The shoulder of the road is soft turf and seed grass, and I expected my tires would spew up earth and stick. I'd have to sheepishly explain to some highway patrolman how I'd gotten stuck then. To my surprise, though, I drove easily around the barrier. I laughed and wondered why I hadn't simply done this before. "What are you doing?" my wife asked, half laughing but also half aghast. "We've given this thing 50 cents loads of times. I think it can give us a pass, just this once." We both laughed as we drove away from the lonely little toll booth, but I think even then, I felt a slight twinge on the back of my neck. I would remember it later and realize I had been warned. We drove down the familiar road, taking in nature's bounty and chuckling at our daring. The trees were ablaze with early fall oranges and deep, healthy greens. The sky was a perfect robin's egg blue, and I just knew that the lake would be wonderful today. We could watch the sunset, maybe have a little fire before going home, and snuggling in bed at the end of a perfect day. It was a good plan, but someone had a different one, it seemed. As we drove, my wife watched the leaves with interest. My wife is an unofficial leaf looker, though she would never admit it, and our house has many pictures of beautiful foliage. As I drove, the roads winding onward, I saw her lift her head from the car window and squint at the passing colors. We were both getting on in years, no spring chickens now, but the look she was giving the leaves was decidedly prudish. It was like an old maid who simply can't believe Miss Tyler let her daughter out in that skirt. "John, does something seem off about the trees?" she asked, sounding perplexed. I looked at the trees, the oranges and reds and greens looking completely natural to me, and I told her so. It does, but it doesn't. It's like seeing trees on television. They look kind of glossy, recorded even. I don't know how to describe it. They just look a little weird. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was seeing things. It had been a long week, and we had been through some pretty stressful times. It was enough to make anyone a little jangled. She kept watching the trees, but I'd put my eyes back on the road, wanting to be there already. We had driven for about another 30 minutes, though, when I had to slow down. Sitting in the road, white and brown with a glossy oak arm, was the toll booth. I stopped and looked around, thinking somebody might be playing a little joke, but there was no one around. The toll booth looked exactly as it had before. It was simulated wood grain, and the walls were painted a dark brown and creamy white. The arm was simulated oak with a glossy finish. It looked exactly like the toll booth, but it couldn't be. Could it? Maybe they thought they'd put up another one, my wife asked, smiling but clearly confused. I laughed a little at that. They were getting a little greedy out here, weren't they? I pulled around this one too, and I watched it disappear in the rearview mirror as we made our way down the road. My wife was still looking raptly at the trees as we drove past, her attention becoming unhealthy. When she asked me to take a look, I glanced over to see the unusual reds and oranges and greens, but something did look a little off about them. Had they become even more vibrant? The foliage looked artificial, almost neon, and it battered against my eyes as we watched them go past. Okay, there's no way you can tell me that was just my imagination. I didn't answer her. I just wanted to get to the lake so we could have our picnic and all would be normal again. This was weird, yeah, but it was just a strange phenomenon. We would make it to the lake and everything would be okay. When we drove here next weekend, or the weekend after that, everything would be just as it had always been. I edged my speed up a little, wanting to pass the weird Technicolor trees and get into the deep woods I knew were coming. We had driven for about another half hour when my brakes screeched against the pavement. I blinked. It just couldn't be. I had been driving these roads for 10 years, and it was always just the one toll booth. My wife seemed startled too, leaning forward to look unbelievingly at the little booth. It looked exactly like the other two, but that was impossible. We had passed it twice, and I was sure there was only one toll booth out here. There would be no reason to think a second one would make any difference. There was so little traffic out here. "What the hell?" my wife asked. And when I pulled around the arm this time, it was a little more aggressively than I meant to. Maybe, she started, pausing a little as she looked nervously at me, maybe we should just pay the toll. I didn't say anything. I had been too mad to even acknowledge the prickle on the back of my neck this time. Stupid, money-grubbing jerks. They hadn't figured they could line their pockets enough with just one toll booth, so they had to have two more. This was unbelievable. I had a sense of humor about the first one, but if they thought they were going to gouge me for another toll, babe, they had another thing coming. I was going to write my congressman, my senator. I'd write the freaking president about this. They couldn't just, John, gouge people like this. What about tourism? What about local beauty spots? What the hell happened to bringing people out so they could, John! I stopped on the brakes and turned to yell, "What?" at my wife as she stared out the window. Normally, she would have chastised me for yelling at her. I don't think I had yelled at her more than a couple of times our whole marriage, but she was too shaken to even take notice. She was looking out the window, staring at the trees with the strange leaves and pointing with a shaky finger. "Look," she stuttered, and I turned to see what she was babbling about. The leaves were still eye-destroyingly bright, but this time they were also melting off the trees. Not regular melting either, but like wet paint dripping off an oversaturated object. I could see them dribbling onto the ground, pooling on the grass as the verdant green lawns became spin art. I put my eyes forward, racing the engine, and tried to reach what I knew was ahead as fast as I possibly could. The toll booth came into view again, but I didn't stop this time. What are you doing?" my wife said, getting nervous as I didn't slow down. I gunned the engine, revving to 70 on the straightaway. "Stop it. Stop. Don't do that." The engine growled as I nudged it up to 80. "John!" my wife screamed, but it was too late. I crashed through the wooden arm and laughed maniacally as the wooden pieces cascaded off the hood and flew to either side. I had made a lot of mistakes that day, but damaging the booth, that was the worst one. My wife screeched when I hit the arm, but one look at me had reduced her to silence. I glanced over at her and immediately felt sorry for what I had done. My foot came off the ignition, and the car slowly spun to a stop in the middle of the two-lane road. I had damaged state property. I was sure there was some sort of camera on the booth somewhere, and it would be easy enough to see me ramming the arm. I thought about driving back to the booth and seeing if there was a number I could call to report the accident. But finally, I just decided to keep going so we could make it to the lake before dark. As I drove, I realized my wife had been silent the whole time. I turned to tell her I was sorry, to apologize for going a little nuts back there, but she wasn't paying any attention to me at all. She was looking at the countryside as it rolled by. "Honey, I'm sorry about all that. I just let it all get to me. I'm sorry for yelling. Sorry for acting like a psycho. I was just so... The trees are wrong, John." Her voice sounded on the edge of hysteria. "What?" I asked, craning my neck around. "They're all dead. They're all dead, John." I turned right, wanting to see what she was talking about, but when I saw the trees, I wasn't sure why it had taken me so long to see. The trees, so vibrant and colorful before, were now sickly and forlorn. The vibrant colors had oozed right out of them, and the leaves hung limply from the trees as their bark hung pale and peeling. It wasn't just the trees either. The sky looked yellow and sick. It made no sense. What the hell was going on? This was nothing like how the road usually was. It was nothing like how it had looked the first time we'd seen the toll booth. I put my foot down on the ignition, and we kept rolling forward towards our destination. It only got weirder the longer we drove. The longer we drove, the more I expected to run into that toll booth again. The longer I drove and didn't encounter that ramshackled booth, the more paranoid I became. The world outside didn't help much either. The sky became darker and darker as we went. The leaves began to drop from the trees in droves. The limbs were skeletal, the bark crumbling from the long, fragile limbs, and the farther we traveled, the more desiccated they became. We should have come to the deep woods by now. We should have come to the lake by now. We should have seen another car, seen a deer, seen something. My wife stopped looking out the window, and I kept sneaking glances at her to make sure she was okay. She just sat hunkered against the seat, rubbing her shoulders as she tried not to notice what was going on outside. I should have been worried about her. I should have stopped to make sure she was okay, but I was feeling on the verge of mental collapse myself. We never made it to our destination, little as I would have wanted to get out if we had. As the sun began to set, I realized how much worse it could get. "Honey," I whispered, not sure how long it had been since we'd spoken. It felt like days, weeks, but my mind railed against this idea. We were just a little lost on a road we had driven so many times we could have set the mile markers. I wasn't sure what was going on here, but I was sure that we would come out of it okay. "We shouldn't have driven around it." "What?" I asked, confused by her answer. "We shouldn't have hurt the toll booth." She turned towards me and she looked afraid. "We should have just paid the toll. Now it's mad, and it might never let us get off this road." "That's nonsense," I said, but it lacked conviction. I had been out here at night before, driving home after a day on the lake, but I had never seen it this dark. The trees no longer looked to be the old pines that I'd come to love. The trees I could see from the headlights looked more like maples, with a thick, dark sap running out of them. If I looked too long at them, some of them even seemed to have faces. I always looked away when I noticed this, afraid to meet their gaze, but I could feel them looking at me nonetheless, challenging me to meet their eyes. As much as I wanted to tell her she was wrong, I couldn't argue the fact that we seemed to be stuck, and it had all started after we drove around the toll booth. "Quick, dig under the seat and see if you can find 15 cents. She looked at me in disbelief. "What? 15 cents? That way, if we see the toll booth again, we can pay the toll and get out of here," I nearly growled at her. She moved slowly, like someone in a dream. She began to search under the seats for change, and as she searched, I kept driving. I was beginning to believe that something outside the norm might be at play here, and the further we drove, the more I also believed that we were being followed. The moon hung overhead, the bright yellow moon like a kid's Halloween drawing, and by that popcorn yellow beam, I could see things running through the woods. They loped along like big dogs, their bodies oddly elongated, and their legs thick and long. I never got more than a quick look at them, but that look was enough. I think I see a quarter in the track of the seat, but I can't get it. Can you pull over so I can reach it?" I gritted my teeth, but a quarter would get us there for sure. I pulled over slowly, my lights still glaring into the woods, and told her to please be quick. My wife stepped out, getting down beside the car so she could reach below the seat. I glanced around nervously, watching the woods for signs of the creatures. My wife was saying how she almost had it, but it kept slipping through her fingers. I told her to be quick, and when I looked back at the tree line, I saw one. It was like a mountain lion that had been dipped in tar. It was like a massive cat, with black ridges of overlapping plates. I imagined I could see the headlights reflected off its grinning mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, and its claws clicked impatiently on the edge of the pavement. "Carol," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the creatures. "I've almost got it," she growled through gritted teeth. The creature didn't seem to have eyes, but its head turned menacingly towards the car as Carol spoke. As the quarter came free, I reached down and grabbed her by the collar of her t-shirt, lifting her into the car. My wife isn't large, maybe 5 feet, but at that moment it wouldn't have mattered if she'd been a giant. I pulled her back into the car and pushed my foot down on the accelerator as hard as I could, the door bumping shut as we got back on the road. If I had hesitated even a moment longer, we'd likely be dead. As it was, I clipped the beastie in the side of the head instead of full in the side. The chest of the creature would have caved the front of my car in, but its head whipped heavily to the side as it broke one of the headlights. I barely noticed as I flew down the road at 70, the other creatures in hot pursuit. We were doing 90 as we barreled forward, but I could see the pack of nightmare hounds right behind us. The rear lights lit their chitinous faces hellishly, and I took the hairpin turns with wheel-screeching accuracy. I'm no NASCAR driver, but the sight of those creatures behind me was enough to push me onward. If they caught me, we'd both be dead. If I crashed, we'd both be dead anyway. Seemed like either way, our options were pretty limited. They followed us for a long while, too long for creatures their size. I was driving 90 most of the time, but they kept pace as easy as if I'd been going 20. I was keeping ahead of them, but only just. I felt them bump the back bumper more than once. They seemed intent on forcing me off the road, but they couldn't quite hit hard enough to force me off. My wife shuddered every time we got hit, and I found myself barely able to keep it on the road after every successful strike. After some indiscriminate amount of time, I looked in the rearview mirror to find that we were alone again. A few minutes later, I saw the toll booth come up into view, but not the one I was used to seeing. This toll booth was black, the paneling looking like the skin on those creatures, and the arm looked like an unprocessed tree trunk. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the money into the basket, whispering sorry as the arm slid up to permit us. We pulled through the turnstile, and it was like crossing some kind of barrier into another world. My grandmother had grown up in Ireland and had sometimes told me stories about people who crossed the barrier between their world and into the realm of Fae. Grandma always said that people could cross into the fairy realm without realizing it, but I knew all too well when I crossed the border out of whatever place we had been in. It was like passing under the coldest waterfall I could imagine. We got home without incident, but it's the craziest thing. We had voicemails from our friends, a client, and even my wife's new job, asking where we were and why we'd been gone for so long. It seemed that even though we had left just after lunch on Sunday, we didn't return till Tuesday night. The car's still damaged, so I know we didn't imagine it. The car is damn near out of gas, and the oil shows that it's almost due for an oil change, despite having been done less than a month ago. I don't know what the hell happened to us, but I know I'll be keeping money in the cup holder from now on. Whether we ever choose to go down that road again or not, I will always have money to feed the toll booths that may appear in my life. You never know where they might take you if you don't play by the rules. This next story always reminds me of the games we used to play in childhood. Tag, statues, a little bit of telephone, and of course, the times that my cousin and I thought we could hook a piece of string to a tin can and use it like a telephone. That's right, this next story has everybody's favorite spooky fellow with the admittedly humorous voice that becomes less humorous as time goes on. So let's hear a story about Tin Can Sam. I was a child in the late 80s. This was a time when kids played till the streetlights came on, and riding your bike through town was as normal as going to the corner store to get your mom some smokes. In fact, the woods seemed to be the only place Dad had specifically said was off limits. The woods seemed to be a boundary for many families, and I never knew anyone who went there willingly. It's one of the few things that stayed the same to this day, though so many others have certainly changed since I was a kid. One prime example was the telephone. Coming from a small town, my telephone was on a party line, so if you wanted to talk to your friend, you went to his house and you did it in person. I was pretty fortunate in that respect. My best friend Davey lived right next door. If I wanted to ask him to play G.I. Joes or ride our bikes, I could just walk 20 paces rather than digging my Huffy out of the garage. Unless, that was, we decided to use the tin can phone. The tin can phones were something we had cooked up after watching a science show on TV. The guy on the show had hooked a pair of tin cans together with twine and showed that no matter how far you went, you could still hear the person on the other end of the can. Davy and I had thought that this was just about the coolest thing we had ever seen, and we set about making some for ourselves. I found a pair of old soup cans and a long spool of Mom's twine, and attached the end to the cans. We could hear each other pretty well, a fact that surprised us to no end, but the farther away we got, the harder it became to hear each other. "Let me show you a different way," Dad said, startling us a little since we had been so involved in our little project. He had linked the cans together with some fishing line, and the connection had been the next best thing to crystal clear. We used them a lot, linking our tree houses together with the phones, and we could talk into the night on them as we camped out in different tree houses. It wasn't as clear as a telephone, but it was amazing the conversations we could have over just a simple little device. When Davy got grounded one summer, they became our only means of communication with each other. Davy, you see, had gotten himself into a little bit of trouble. He had gotten addicted to the new arcade that had just come up downtown. The laundromat that had once been there had been cleared out, but I can remember smelling detergent and fabric softener every time I went to play a game of Pac-Man or Galaga. Davy and I went there a lot, but Davy seemed to have developed an unhealthy love for the games. Any money that he could scrape together was shoved into the arcade machine, and I remember noticing that he was absent from school in the middle of the day and suspected that he had snuck off to the arcade. When the truancy officer brought him home around lunchtime one day, his parents finally decided that enough was enough. He was grounded for the summer. They told him that he might manage to earn some of his stuff back with good behavior, but forbid him to go to the arcade until he could get a handle on his addiction. Davy and I talked over the tin can when we could, but Davy made it pretty clear that his parents would take that away if they found it. We would camp out every weekend when the weather was fair, and we talked most of the night, me suddenly being Davy's only real connection to the world. So when I picked up the can one night, calling for Davy through the 100 feet of fishing line, I was surprised to hear someone else pick up right away. As it turned out, though, it wasn't who I was expecting. "Hello?" said a small voice, not like Davy's at all. It sounded like an adult trying to do a bad imitation of a kid's voice. "Who's this?" it said again, and I remember shaking off my uncertainty as I remember that Davy liked to do voices sometimes. Davy and I sometimes listened to the radio DJs prank call people, or we'd catch comedy performances on the satellite TV Davy's family had. Davy had a few characters he'd been working on, despite the fact that they all just kind of sounded like him, and I assumed that this was nothing more than another bad character performance. "Who's this?" I challenged back. "This is Sam," the voice said, still high-pitched, but getting a little surer of itself as the string made it sound tinny and robotic. "But my friends call me Tin Can Sam." Yup, definitely a new voice. If it had been modern day, I would have said that it reminded me of Herbert the Pervert from the Family Guy show. It was 1991, however, and all I could equate it to was the funny way that Michael Jackson talked. The voice was funny, kinda, but it still just sounded like Davy doing a bit. "Okay, well, Sam, why do they call you Tin Can, then?" "'Cause I wear the tin cans I empty like jewelry and clatter everywhere I go. I'm a hobo, you see, and most of my meals are taken from cans. Who do I have the pleasure of conversing with tonight?" I played along and introduced myself to Tin Can Sam. He asked me if I went to school, and I told him that we were out for the summer. He asked if I lived around here, and I told him I lived next door. He asked me how old I was, and if I knew the kid who owned the treehouse, and a dozen other things as I played along. Some of you guys will think this is weird. Why would I surrender a lot of information to Davy that he would already have, especially if he was doing a bit? Well, to answer that question, you'd have to understand how Davy was when he was doing a character. Davy was one of those people who would commit to a role. If he was doing a new character, that person didn't know you. Interacting with him was like meeting Davy all over again. But he was my friend, so I put up with it. At least it wasn't Grandma Gerda, who had a memory problem and constantly forgot the things you told her. So I played along with the game, asking Sam what it was like to be a hobo. "It's all right, I guess. I used to own a hardware store, but the people didn't like me very much, so I had to leave. It's rough not having a house sometimes, but I meet so many interesting people on the road." "What do you do for fun?" I asked, nodding to myself at how thoroughly Davy had committed to the role. "Tell stories, mostly. Sit around the fire at night and eat your dinner and tell tales. We especially like scary stories." "Scary stories?" I asked, a little taken aback. Davy was not a fan of scary stories. He liked to play it cool, but he was a bit of a scaredy cat at the core of it all. When we watched the scary movies sometimes, the volume low so his parents didn't catch us, Davy always hid his eyes and sobbed sometimes when the killer got somebody. Sam liking scary stories was not something I was prepared for. "Do you like scary stories?" Sam asked, his voice sounding hungry for the answer. "Yeah, I like scary stories. I got a real scary one if you'd like to hear it." I nodded before realizing he wouldn't be able to see me and told him that I did. I was still absolutely sure that this was Davy doing a bit, but the longer I listened, the less sure that I was becoming. The longer I listened, the more the voice sounded less like Davy and more like a stranger. "Good, 'cause it's a real scary story. It's about these kids who were camping in the woods one night. They didn't have a tree house like you, but a tent instead. They had set up far from town where they lived, and they camped at the site often. They came there for a sleepover one night, but they didn't know that there was an extra in their party this time." I sat on the fluffy orange rug I had taken after Mom was going to throw it out and felt my teeth trying to chatter. If this was a bit that Davy was doing, then it was better than usual. As the string brought his words to me, I remember feeling my spine shudder in my back. This was different. Way different, and I wasn't entirely sure that I liked it. "As I came up, they heard me. They looked out to see what was making so much noise, peeking from the zipper as they looked into the once inviting woods. It was dark, though, and the woods were dense. As I moved about, rattling and shaking, they kept looking around anxiously, trying to figure out where I was. The more I moved, the more it scared them. They thought I was a ghost or some sort of spook, and the longer I rattled, the more they shivered. It was windy that night, and I seemed to be everywhere." Oh, okay, Davy," said my voice shaking a little as I watched the fire and my lantern dance. I don't like this game anymore." "Who's Davy? I told you my name's Tin Can Sam. Now where was I?" I looked out the window, trying to see if Davy was in his treehouse, but the branches of the big oak his dad had built it in obscured the structure. All I could really see was the string as it hung taut between us. "Oh, that's right. I could hear them whispering over there, discussing their chances if they ran. They didn't think they stood a chance if they stayed, but if they ran, well, they believed I could only catch one of them. They were arguing, starting to yell, and as they got louder and louder, I crept up to their tent. I'd have had them then and there, but suddenly they burst out of the tent and ran in every direction. I smiled as they ran, knowing that I could easily catch more than one of them. "Stop it, Davy," I yelled, the story creeping me out, and when coupled with the voice he told it in, I don't want to hear any more. Despite this, I felt unable to take the can away from my ear. "I caught them, and I cut them. I sliced them, and I diced them. I cut their throats, and I sliced out their tongues. I cut their legs, and I took off their fingers, and when I turned my attention to the third boy, I knew I could get him before he got home. I took off after him, my cans rattling like ghostly chains. He kept glancing behind him, hearing my clatter as I got closer and closer. His feet slapped against the ground, and if he'd hit a single root, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I was so close, my knife still wet with his friend's blood, and as I lunged, he jumped over a small fence and came into his backyard. I stood, watching as he tripped and rolled onto the grass of his house, and when he looked back, I melted into the woods. His race won." I let the tin can fall to the rug, not wanting to hear anything else as I scrambled to the ladder to my treehouse and pulled it up. Unlike the children in the story, I was not in a tent. I knew that no one could get me if that ladder was up, and as I dragged it into the treehouse, I could see a shadow as it hunkered at the edge of the fence that separated my yard from Davy's. It was a man, a skinny wisp of a man, with strings of cans hanging off him. He looked up at me as I looked down at him, and even in the dark, I could see his broad white teeth as he grinned. I slammed the trapdoor shut, but even in my tree fort, I wasn't outside his reach. As I hunkered on the carpet, I heard his voice ooze from the can as he left one final word on the matter. "Tell your father he was right to tell you to be cautious of the woods." He may have said more, but I threw the can out the window then and heard it tonk as it landed in Davy's yard. I spent the rest of the night with my knees against my chest, jumping at every sound outside as I listened for the clank of cans. I didn't come out when the sun came up, and when someone called my name from the ground, I jumped in surprise. Looking out my window, I was happy to see that it was my dad. I came down the ladder, leaping into his arms as I cried against his shoulders. "What's the matter, kiddo? You have a bad night?" he asked, smiling but clearly concerned. I felt him stiffen when I told him what Tin Can Sam had said, and I felt him hug me even tighter. "I'm so sorry," he said. I never slept in that treehouse again, and after I told Davy about what had happened, I don't think he did either. I'm an adult now, and my parents' house is my house. After Dad died of a stroke while I was in college and Mom passed away a few years later, Melinda and I decided to move into what was the largest part of my inheritance. Our children love the big backyard, the treehouse that I've refurbished and repaired, but I always warned them to stay out of the woods. They always begged to be allowed to explore, but I've put my foot down where the woods are concerned. I've never seen Tin Can Sam again, but if I ever think that maybe I imagined it, all I have to do is listen carefully on quiet nights. Sometimes, if you listen closely, you can still hear the clank and jangle of the old cans as they blow in the breeze. One more story for you, and this time I've saved the best for last. Let's hear a little story about a chair that nobody wants to sit in. A little bit of furniture that waits in the woods for the worthy and the unworthy alike. Let's hear a story about the woodland seat. Everyone had heard of the throne, but very few people had ever seen it. The woodland seat was something of a local legend. If you follow the river into the woods, turn east at the huge rubber tree at the fork, and walk into the setting sun, you'll come to the Devil's Clearing. In the clearing, a place where nothing is said to grow, sits a chair of stone. If you sit on the chair, you'll be cursed by the devil himself for all time. It's a story I've heard since I was old enough to go to sleepovers, and it's a story I've always wanted to prove or disprove. People have gone into the woods, and I remember the first time someone showed me shaky cam footage from a camcorder of a weird stone chair with faces carved into it. It was later proven to be a fake. The chair was something they'd made themselves and shot at night, but other people claimed to have gone into the woods and found it, their videos proving either better or worse than that first bit of wobbly cinematography that I watched on a couch at my friend John's house. But they all fed the fire of my enthusiasm. It's always been my dream to see it, the real seat. And when Mrs. Raggles assigned us a final project about urban legends for senior English class, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. The assignment was actually about the cause of urban legends, and she wanted us to make our own. When I asked if we could make our project a search for the woodland seat, she looked almost tickled. This wouldn't have anything to do with John's senior project for AV, would it, she asked, giving me a little wink. It might, I hedged, as good as telling her our intentions. John and I have been friends for years, and his interest in movies, especially making them, has been ongoing since the two of us were in elementary school. John got his first camera when he was 6, some cheap thing that his dad had picked up from Toys R Us after John practically begged him for it. I'd say John definitely got his money's worth, because we spent the next 4 years making our own short films and epic movies in the backyard. Through the years, John's cameras may have changed, but his interest in filmmaking hasn't. He often calls on me and our friends, Sean and Fred, to star in his latest project, and this would be no exception. I got enough battery packs and memory cards to reward for 3 straight days, he told us as we sat in his garage and suffered through his pitch meeting. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to shoot the next found footage masterpiece. John's project, his senior film thesis, was about urban legends too, specifically their place in horror films. He wanted to make the Woodland Seat the antagonist in his new found footage movie, the witch in his Blair Witch Project, in other words, and use us as his bumbling teen cast that goes looking for it. I was looking forward to using this trip to write my own paper for Mrs. Raggles, but Sean and Fred were just looking for an excuse to go camping for a few days in the lush woods that surround our town. We'd all grown up in the area, and the woods weren't unknown to us. We all enjoyed camping, right up until the first winter chill sent us back inside every year. And I too was looking forward to spending some time in the woods, cooking hot dogs and s'mores as we told stories and just hung out this weekend. So when we told our parents we'd see them Monday night and headed into the woods Friday afternoon, we were prepared to spend the next 3 days in nature. We had plenty of food, plenty of water, and we were properly prepared with a 4-man tent and sleeping bags. It was April, and the weather was already becoming unseasonably warm, so we didn't think we needed anything too strenuous. John was carrying his film equipment, his camera already out, and the 3 of us were carrying the stuff we would need for camping and survival, acting as his trusty pack mules. As we came to the river, the surface frothing with the late-season snowmelt from the nearby mountains, John told me this would make a great place to film the intro. The river is, after all, the first leg of the journey. From here, we set out to find the Woodland Seat and write our names for all to see across history. I'll never forget the grin that spread across his face at that moment. It was a golden moment, but nothing golden is made to last. He counted me down as I stood beside the river, preparing to give my lead-in statement. Fred and Sean had unanimously decided that I would do most of the speaking lines for this little movie. Neither of them really wanted to learn any of the lines that John wanted read, and I had the most video-worthy narration voice, they said. I think they just wanted to goof off on our camping trip, but, to be fair, so did I. This is the Leftree River, the start of our journey. I wasn't sure I could even be heard over the rushing rapids, but John gave me a thumbs up, and I struggled on. Legend says that if you follow the river until you come to a huge old rubber tree, you turn east and walk into the woods until dusk, you'll come to the Devil's Clearing and find the Woodland Seat. Those who sit on it are cursed, tormented for all eternity for daring to sit where the devil himself once took rest. Tonight, we intend to find that seat. And cut, John said, hitting the stop button as he nodded slowly. Very nice. Love it. So what happens if we don't find this rubber tree? Sean asked as we shouldered our packs and headed deeper into the woods. I guess we just wait till we find the fork in the river, I said, after thinking about it for a few seconds. What if we don't find that? Fred asked, taking a sip from his water as the leaves smushed wetly beneath our feet. Boys, you're missing the point, John said. Which is, Fred asked. The point isn't to find the Woodland Seat or not. We're here to follow the instructions and see if we find anything or not. That's the project. The legend is what brought us here, the power of the urban legend itself. And now we seek to learn where it can take us. Fred laughed. So this could all be a wild goose chase is what you're telling us. I snorted and bumped him with my shoulder. You're getting a 3-day vacation out of it, Fred. Buck up. We followed the river as the afternoon rattled on. The woods were nice this time of year. Summer was on the cusp of arrival, and everything was green. The water would be too cold for swimming, though I suppose Sean might try. Sean liked the cold. He was built for it, and he would probably take a swim tomorrow before we set off. None of us figured we would make it to the Devil's Clearing by sunset today. We'd set up camp, cook some dogs, do some fishing, and tomorrow we'd proceed on. We were camping after all, so what was the point of hurrying? We walked most of the first day. We weren't going very fast. We'd been at school all day, and we weren't in any real hurry anyway. Monday was a holiday to boot, and our parents knew where we were and wouldn't expect us home till Monday night. We talked and joked, the usual high school boy banter filling our afternoon. But as the sun began to set, we started looking for this tree or this fork. We had been assured that this was the way to go by some kids who had totally been to the Devil's Clearing, and that too was part of the project. If we couldn't find our way by the urban legend alone, then what was the point? It was starting to get dark when we came to the rubber tree. It had to be the one from the stories. For one, it was huge. It was far larger than any normal tree I'd ever seen, and the leaves left very little mystery about its type. It was also smack in the cleft of the river, the water diverting east and west from there, and it seemed like a good place as any to set up our tent. Sean started assembly as Fred and I went to collect firewood. We left John to set up our fire pit and returned with wood to find the pit dug and the tent already erected. As proper dark fell around us, we filled the woods with the smell of roasting weenies, canned chili, and s'mores. "So how do you reckon the chair curses you?" Fred asked, blowing the fire off his blackened hot dog before laying it across a piece of white bread. "Dunno," John said, around a mouthful of meat, and I just shrugged. "I thought you were the expert here," Sean said to me, as he closed his s'more into the metal sphere he used to toast the whole edifice. "I mean, I know the chair is supposed to sit in the clearing, but I don't actually know anything about what it does. There are no stories about how it curses you, so I guess no one's ever been stupid enough to try to sit in it." "Or," John said after swallowing his bite, "it's so bad that it stops anyone from talking about it." We discussed it a little more as the night went on, but as the food was packed away and the fire was doused, we all retired to our sleeping bags for some much-needed rest. I think all of us thought about the seat a little as we drifted off, but it was hard to focus on much after such a long day of hiking. The next day was spent swimming in the river, fishing, going over what we would do that night. John explained how we would come on the clearing at dusk, the sun making a great backdrop for the film. Sean would sit in the chair, pretend to get possessed or something, while the rest of us ran into the woods. There'd be lots of heavy breathing and shaky cam, and then we would begin recording once we had got back to camp. We'll explain how Sean went missing, and then we'll stage some weird noises or something as we record inside the tent. "What happens if we find the chair before dusk?" Fred asked. "Then we stop or make circles till the time is right." "What happens if we don't find the place at all?" Fred asked. John shrugged. "We shoot a piece saying that our search was fruitless and that the legend remains just that." So, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, we set off towards it. From the start, today's hike seemed different. The walk yesterday had been filled with talk and jokes, but today the wood seemed to scowl at the noise we were bringing into its depths. I didn't know right away if the others noticed, but I started to believe that they felt it too. Sean had tried to initiate jokes more than once, but ended up looking around guiltily when the laughter became too loud. Fred was the same way, shushing us more than once before looking around as if to ask why he had done that. John was oblivious, of course, his camera taking it all in as we plotted. If anything, he probably thought we were playing into his vision and was glad for the implied tension. I found myself watching the sun as it rode lower and lower in the sky, not sure if I was dreading being in these suddenly silent woods or finding the thing I'd always wanted to see. The closer we got, the more sure I was that we would find it, and that scared me. I could believe that the devil had come to this place, could believe that he had walked this very path, and I found myself looking down as if I were looking to see hoof prints. No bird song graced this place, none of the usual sounds from insects as they anticipated nightfall, and the silence was unnatural. The woods were lush, the trees thick, but the whole place felt wrong. I didn't have a word for it at the time, but I do now. The word I was looking for was blighted. When do we get to this thing? Sean asked as he wiped his forehead. He turned to look at me, but I just shrugged. It said we walk towards the sunset, and then you find it. Well, it better hurry up, Sean said. We're losing the light, and we'll be setting up camp in the dark in another hour. The sun was getting low beyond the trees, and I realized he was right. The story had never actually said how far you had to walk, just that you had to follow the setting sun. Who knew how far one would actually have to go, or how long you'd have to slog before you got to the seat? We walked for another 20 minutes or so before we began to see something ahead, something that thinned the trees as we walked. The shadows were gathering as we approached the clearing, and it seemed that they gathered around the large and intimidating chair. "Holy shit," John breathed. "It is real." Boy, was it ever. The chair was roughly 5 feet tall and as wide as a lazy boy recliner. It looked to be made of concrete, set with carvings of gems that were painted on by a deft hand. Across the back of the chair, right where a person's back and head would sit, were 3 gray faces with red eyes and open mouths. They all looked identical, but the more I looked, the more I realized how different they all were. One appeared to be crying, another laughing, the middle one simply scowling. The whole construct looked like it would be at home in a mini-golf course or a weird maze attraction, or even a temple found randomly in the middle of the woods. It looked as out of place in the clearing as a dining room set, and as much as I wanted to see it, I couldn't bring myself to get too close to it. It was wrong. Its very essence was foul, and I couldn't comprehend why I'd ever wanted to find this thing in the first place. As John recorded the thing, he pulled his eye away long enough to wave his hand and try to get Sean's attention. He wanted him to go sit in the chair, as they had discussed, and the fact that he was still standing there frustrated John. Sean, for his part, seemed willing enough to comply, but was unable. He was frozen in place, staring at the chair as if he had never seen a chair before in his life, and John pointed at him and then back at me as he tried to get him to go. Sean shuddered as I shook him, looking at me almost dreamily as I got his attention. "Go sit in the chair," I whispered, and Sean nodded slowly as he approached it. He was stopped, however, when Fred pushed him out of the way and made to plant himself on the seat. "What the hell is he doing?" John whispered. I didn't know how to answer him. The two struggled with each other, and the fight would have looked theatrical if I didn't know they weren't acting. Both of them had this blank look, the kind of look you got when you're listening to someone on the phone while you do something else. Fred won their little scuffle, shoving Sean back hard enough to make him fall on his butt, and claimed his prize. He took his seat on the throne, a look of deep satisfaction stretching across his face that slowly became something more exalted. Sean just sat there, looking at him with ambivalence, and as John stepped towards him, something happened. As he sat there, basking in the glow of his newly won seat, Fred's skin began to blister. At first it was just general reddening that I nearly missed in the diminishing light. It was something I could have set aside as just sunburn until the blisters began to appear. His arms and face broke out, the pus-filled sores growing and bursting in fast motion. The blood and pus ran down his arms and the seat of the chair, and as the sun set, his skin began to boil off his bones. He looked like the guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark as his bones began to show through his skin, and as he basked in whatever glow he was experiencing, as he liquefied in the woodland seat, I saw Sean get up and shove Fred's distinctly drippy skeleton out of the chair so that he could take its place. I tried to stop him. I called his name as I came towards him, but he showed no hesitation in the face of Fred's sacrifice. I looked back at John, expecting abject horror, but he had taken the camera away from his eye, and I could see him crying as he watched Sean begin to redden. Not crying in terror or anguish. That would have been easily explained. John was crying in exultation, like a priest who's seen the face of God. John, we have to go now, I said, shaking him. He didn't seem to hear me. He had eyes only for the quickly blistering Sean. John, I yelled, shaking his arm. We got to get away from here. We need to tell someone what happened. We need to get Sean out of that thing. We need to... But when I turned back, it was already too late. Sean's skin was melting off his bones, the white already visible, and as his eyes liquefied in his sockets, I tried to pull John away. John, please, I begged. Please, we don't have to do this. Don't. But he was already walking towards the chair. As it finished with Sean, he shoved the skeleton out of the seat and sat down amongst the goo and the rot that lay there. That was when I noticed something else. Something I hadn't until Sean's skeleton hit the earth. Fred's bones had disintegrated into powder. A powder that was already being taken away by the forest breeze. I started to run, but something caught my eye before I could get out of the clearing. I saw the camera, the little handheld that John brought into the woods, and I scooped it up before beating a hasty retreat. I fled like a coward, leaving my best friends behind, and I prayed I would never see that cursed chair again. I stumbled through the woods for 3 days, eating whatever I found and drinking from the stream when I finally got back to it. I wished many times that I had picked up one of the bags on my way back out of the clearing, a tent or some food at least, but all I had was the camera and the clothes on my back. I thought about the tent many times as I lay shivering on the damp forest floor, watching the trees for anything, the shadow of the chair, maybe the walking corpses of my friends. I wasn't sure which I was more afraid of seeing, but I just knew that both would be after me before I could escape. When the search party found me on Tuesday, I was afraid my fears had come to pass. They took me to the hospital, but when the police tried to question me, I just handed them the camera and trembled in the face of their questions. That was years ago, nearly a decade, but it's something I never forgot. I haven't seen the footage I gave the police. I have no desire to. The officer who reviewed it said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen, but it did exonerate me of the crime. I think they might have been planning to look further for the bodies of my friends, but after seeing that tape, they scrapped the idea. There was no sense in looking for kids who were no longer there, and less sense in risking officers who might decide to have a seat as well. I lost my best friends that night. Sometimes it feels like the chair cursed me after all. Everyone in town assumed I had something to do with their disappearance, though they never got up the courage to say it to my face. I ended up leaving town to attend college, and I've never seen any reason to go back. Kids, however, still go missing in those woods. I can't help but wonder how many of them are lost to the woodland seat. So if you find a strange chair in the forest, steer clear. It's made for only one occupant, though it will gladly accept you as long as you can bear it. I think that'll just about do it for us today. I do hope you'll join us next time for more cozy horror and more great stories read with friends around a fire, and yours truly, of course. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.